This is a series of conversations on great individuation, the full capacity for human psychological and spiritual development. Murray Stein is a celebrated Jungian psychoanalyst living in Switzerland, and Jim Manganiello is a pioneering depth psychologist and a long-time Zogem practitioner living in Boston. The word sanity has many meanings. In this conversation, Murray and Jim think together about what sanity means when one takes into account the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious.
What I'd like to talk with you about today is the nature of sanity. Sanity. How do you, as a psychologist, and I, as a Jungian analyst, think about this fundamental notion? We know today's world is in very bad shape. We're in a type of crisis, and people aren't sure about their mental status. Do they know what's really going on? What is sanity in a world that seems insane?
Sad to say, Murray, but defined in the context of today's world in quotes, we have to consider that sanity is being chronically agitated, depressed, upset, maybe even a little paranoid as well. Things are quite crazy. It's hard to connect the dots in any way where things look okay or sane. It's kind of a naked truth. That something is seriously awry. Life seems to be out of control, frightening, dangerous. No one seems to be in control, and power is too often in the hands of the least and the worst among us, all driven by unconscious forces. Those in power seem to be driving around blindfolded. I get fearful that only catastrophe will bring the insanity to a screeching halt and have us look at it with an eye that says something must change. People seem to be completely unaware of what exactly is going wrong, although there is a felt sense that something is seriously wrong. You have any ideas, Murray, about what we might be able to do about this as depth psychologists?
Well, Jim, I think we have to look at the unconscious forces. If we can tease them out, if we can get a glimpse of them. The conscious mind by itself doesn't really get the big picture. We have to somehow break out of our frameworks and constructions. But you and I have talked a lot about levels of the human psyche. There's a part of us that's oriented to the world around us and that we perceive with our senses and we try to understand. But then we have the question, are we perceiving things accurately? Or are we interpreting them in a slanted, distorting way? Are we projecting, creating false realities that we can barely believe in, but seem to make some sense? I think sanity is getting a grasp on the whole somehow and having a true picture, if there is such a thing, if we can get to it. We have to examine our thinking and emotions. We have to try to get underneath them or behind them. And only then I think sanity might become possible. It must include the subjective factor, that is, knowledge of the psyche in all its dimensions, because the psyche is how is what we have to try to understand and grasp who we are, what is the world. Otherwise, we live in a partially realized and incomplete mental world.
Yes, yes, definitely. You know, based on ongoing considerations and discussions, the limited conscious self, or what we might call the temporal self, needs to awaken to the depths and heights of what we could call the atemporal or the timeless self, perhaps also called the heart and wisdom-based self, self written with a capital S. You know, if we can see the light of the self, we don't question its existence. We don't require proof of its existence. And the fact is that we seem to be held captive and prisoners of the surface thinking mind, where we're simply unaware of the treasure, the depths that lay within the deepest inner dimension of our mind, which we could call spiritual and even mystical. And in our work, our consideration, in the context of individuation, that makes great sense. Until somebody becomes conscious of their mind's deepest nature, they're prone to egocentric identity and development. And this goes on in such immense degree today that it, I think, is mistaken as normal, as the way things are, so that there's no reflection or echo in people's lives where they can see themselves as needing some reflection on course correction and what they're thinking, feeling, and doing. And, you know, I feel this is going on, but one of the things that's truly insane today is that what's going on is so obviously disturbing, distressing. The grab for power and money is just nakedly absurd. And yet people seem to be ruthlessly focused on this as a reasonable way to frame life and live life. This is the essence of the dilemma, I feel, this egocentrism, with the ego in charge, completely cut off from the deeper identity of the self. There's not a great deal of hope. The task is to, how do we make conscious what's unconscious? How can this light become visible to people so they can be oriented toward it instead of completely unaware of its existence?
For us, human beings, our species, somehow turned out that the instincts that are given in our inherited genetic makeup seem mostly to lead to a type of ego-centered psychology. And that means very limited perspectives. We don't really catch the winds around us or see the stars above us. It's all very limited by our, as you say, our need to assert ourselves as egos, grasp for power and position and money.
All well said, Murray. The dilemma is foreboding. It's serious, and it doesn't seem to have any capacity to self-correct. But if the self in time can somehow cross the bridge into timelessness and drop into the depths of a deeper reality, an awakened reality, and then return from that experience, the depths of that transformative experience, return to embodied life and time, there might be some opportunity to reconsider, might be some opportunity to benefit from that echo and reflection, which can unveil not only how crazy things seem to be, how dangerous things seem to be, but that there is some opportunity to pull over the side of the road and reconsider. Not quite sure what's going to happen, but certainly there has to be an appreciation for the importance of psychology, not simply as a profession embedded in small contexts, but psychology is so ubiquitous. For example, I mean, I think it's obvious that politics needs an infusion of psychology so that things can be better understood, more well thought out, greater possibilities for collaboration and cooperation can arise. The other thing that I think is important is we're talking, as far as psychology goes, that spirituality is not something outside of the mind, that spirituality, timelessness, and embodied life are interdependent. There has to be some greater connection between them. With other words, what's unconscious in the depths of our heart needs to be made conscious so that the ego can become better oriented towards something that has real meaning and real purpose. We need to explore how to move between time and timelessness, between the ego self and the atemporal self. Somehow we have to figure out how to create a bridge between them.
Yes, I recently heard a story of a woman who had a near-death experience. I can't remember the details of it, but she died more or less medically, and then was brought back by her doctors. And so she had what's called a near-death experience. She was conscious during that time, even though it didn't register on their instruments. And this experience was so powerful that it actually changed her whole attitude toward life. She said it was an experience of timelessness, or what we would call the timeless, the non-temporal self. But it was an experience of entering into a dimension, we could call it a dimension of reality that isn't time-bound. And then she brought that back into her everyday life, and it transformed the way she functioned in her world, in her ego world.
Right.
Now, this kind of a transformation is, what is classically called metanoia. It's an experience of something that far exceeds our temporal knowledge and understanding, and gives us a whole new perspective on who we are, what is our purpose in life.
Yes.
What is our position in relation to the greater good, not just our own ego good, but it gives us a big picture. So some people have this kind of a breakthrough on entheogens or in meditation or in dreams. And I think our challenge is to try to create as you say, a bridge, a means of bringing this into our time-bound temporal ego world and using it. It's useful. It isn't something just to report, oh, I had an interesting experience, or maybe I'll go back and remember it again sometime. It's like going to church on Sundays, and the rest of the week you live in the world of power and money. You split. We want to try to overcome that split. We want to create a type of individuation, as we call it, a development that includes a spiritual, timeless dimension and the temporal, everyday ego dimension.
Definitely. Certainly, this has to be part of our inquiry. You know, the among the issues that you raise are how is life lived today so that people are born and they're initiated, introduced, even indoctrinated into a way of life that's very superficial and surface. We have to really look at that carefully. You know, particularly early development is an issue where it's almost as if there's a fork in the road, there's a crossroads. You either develop a connection and a relationship to the heart or you don't. You know, if a bird is born into a cage with parents who've lived in a cage all their lives, whose parents have also lived in a cage all their lives, that bird's going to be quite limited in its sense of what its existence is all about. You know, to jump from one perch to another instead of flying free in a clear, cloudless sky, there's quite a difference there.
Yeah.
We seem to have become oriented toward this, you know, this materialistic nightmare vision where the purpose of life is just absurd. And I think that some connection to our deep interior has to be made. And then we have to figure out a way to allow that deep connection to spread within our being so that we can orient ourselves to it, which is not easy. I think you raise the issue of the entheogens, for example. Psychedelics are very, very valuable, potentially. Today, I know it's in vogue for people to be resurrecting psychedelics as something you can use in therapy or analysis, which I'm not especially fond of, unless the focus is indeed to help facilitate this deeper connection to one's being, instead of a kind of a one-off that's contextualized on a level that doesn't address that primary concern. You know, there's something very powerful about the psychedelics, the magic of these molecules. You may recall that when they were originally made their way into the culture, it's a very dramatic time, often misunderstood. People talk about things like Woodstock. The real show was over by the time that Woodstock came to pass. But people were introduced not only into the depths of their being, but they learned what it was like to be connected to other people who were also connected. And it wasn't uncommon for folks to not know what day it was, and for some folks to even not know what month it was. That can be looked at as some kind of indication of a drug problem, but that wasn't the case. It was the fact that, you know, the rat race was no longer attractive as something that was worth living for. Even in terms of the meditative traditions, they oftentimes, practitioners naively err in avoiding their temporal psychology. They become focused on this experience of transcendence or equanimity, and they fail to recognize that the ego-driven life is a life of trouble and problems, not only for ourselves as individuals, but for our species.
I find very interesting what you say about living in the cage, and parents have lived in the cage and their parents have lived in the cage. How can you possibly break free of that cage? This is cultural conditioning that we're all subject to. So this window of time that you talk about and education, you know, I think spirituality can be introduced very early in childhood. Often we think of spirituality as something that's left to old age,
Right.
older people going back into their religious beliefs and so on. But I think there is something about that the child is open to an experience of the timeless more than adults are. And if the adult can relate to that in a particular way, it becomes foundational in the person's life, that eternity and timelessness and the divine is a reality. It's experienceable. Many people think it's just a concept, and theology is all there is to it. Theology is really based on somebody's experience, but the experience tends to get lost. So it's such a tall order to bring these two together, duality and non-duality, and live them both at one and the same time. What we want to avoid is the seesaw effect, kind of dissociated states of mind. Now you're here and now you're there. What we're aiming for is to be totally holy in the world of temporality, while at the same time being holy in the world of non-temporality. So it's like a duet, they're singing together. This would be what we could call sanity in the highest sense, individuation in the most complete form. So our topic is sanity. We're trying to take sanity out of its definition as being alert and aware of what's going on around you with your senses. Reality testing, as it's usually considered, but to take into account this other reality as well, that reality is bigger than just what we take in with our non-temporal, with our temporal minds.
I agree fully. What you're saying raises the issue. If you think about it, psychology needs a much clearer, much more robust voice. It really needs to be pulled out of the associations, organizations, I would say the universities as well. You're talking about something fundamental, which is that the way children are raised, the sensibilities they're exposed to, the vision of life they're exposed to, basically are incredibly formative as to what those children grow up to be, how they grow up to be. One of the things that is missing is that you, even at a beautiful spot by the ocean, you look out and you can feel the embrace of something that is larger than getting back into the parking lot and going into your car and then sitting in traffic and then going back to your small world with the preoccupation of 10,000 things that has to be done. I think what you're talking about, I'm going to frame it in a kind of inelegant phrase, but it's deliberate psychological education, whether intentional or whether just indirect by virtue of children being exposed to people who are, shall we say, sane, that know how to be with themselves, that are relaxed, that are connected to the intermittent sparks of wisdom and love that come forth from the heart, and that are connected to one another in that context as well. One of the things, not to keep dragging in the 60s, but it's a great example of what happens when people become exposed radically to different levels of their own mind, and they make a connection with each other. One of the things that went on at that time, I think, that was so important for a while was the music.
Yes.
I think we talked before how Joseph Campbell was moved so deeply at a Grateful Dead concert.
Yes.
That music was keeping free space open, was keeping that consciousness of the self, of the heart open. And it's very dangerous to culture. It wasn't accidental that, the government actually started killing people who were embracing that way of life. Kent State was not an accident, wasn't a tragic event. It was a planned event, and it wasn't the only place. There were 4 or 5 universities where that happened. So that part of what I'm coming back to psychology needs a clearer voice, a better microphone. It has to make these connections instead of having a little small part of the canvas that doesn't necessarily demonstrate a better way that leads to a better day.
Psychology can get hijacked.
Yes.
And used for power purposes. I'm thinking of the psychologists who worked in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
The misuse of psychology, also for advertising. Psychology has been used. Symbols are very powerful. Psychology studies symbols. Symbols reach deeply into the psyche. They stimulate feeling. They stimulate desires or wishes, longings. And this can be used for all kinds of purposes, political, economic, power purposes. So when psychology gets hijacked, it loses its mission. We have to talk about what is psychology's mission. What is psychology meant to do? Our view, I think we've come to this over time together. Our view is psychology is meant to elevate the human condition, to take the species equipment problem that you've mentioned and raise it to another dimension or connect it to another dimension. This is psychology's mission. It certainly was Jung's mission. That's why Jung is not taught in psychology departments in universities. He's taught in religious studies departments or art departments, or because he says psychology in the universities is without psyche, it's without soul. So the whole project of depth psychology is to connect our consciousness to our soul and to those deeper dimensions that we are talking about as the self. And that will give us a different perspective on life. To agree, that's psychology's mission.
Exactly. Well, you said a mouthful, all of which rings very, very true. When you think about psychology in university settings, these days, psychology departments are proud to say that they're teaching and researching and imagining a psychology that is a brain science, which is just complete buffoonery. I taught in universities. Not only did I have to endure an education in a university setting for a long time, but I taught for 9 years until I finally threw the towel in. And I've left with a conviction that, particularly in the context of psychology departments, the truly creative intellect is regarded as digressive and annoying. So that all of the issues that you're raising so very well, how do we get the platform from which we can make these points in ways that they can't be ignored or denied, because these are so critical, the issues that we indeed have to make some connection, not only in the service of reducing the calamity and the insanity of war, never-ending wars, killing, murder, all the obscenities that pass for life that we seem to drive by. You mentioned psychology being hijacked. I mean, if you look at what's going on today in America, this never-ending drumbeat of showing images of the lunacy that is passing for this political situation. I mean, it's a farce. My dog can see it, and yet these programs are just nonstop. And you notice that in the first 10 or 15 minutes, there's no commercials, so that they really get the hook in you. And then all of a sudden, the frequency and speed with which the commercials come in. In the United States, most of these commercials are dominated by medicines. You know, if your right nostril is bothering you, take guacamole dip derived drug, with beautiful music and pictures in the background, but beware of the side effects. Your right leg might fall off. You might develop cancer. So on and so. It's just insane. It's just completely insane. So your point about Jung is sadly true. And his work stands out as something so substantial, and his commitment to it as a work in progress to steer the ship toward deeper waters, safer waters, has been largely ignored. So, we have to ask, when do we begin to educate psychologists, whether in universities or in training institutes, so that they understand what the dilemma really is and figure out how to get connected to the self in substantial ways, the timeless self, the heart, the wisdom location, and then be able to help others do the same?
Well, I think we have to present a vision that, it's the same. I think it's the same thing in politics. The politicians aren't really presenting a vision that is at least in line with what we would call sane, but a vision that appeals to what we know is inherent in every human being. In the unconscious, there is the light, there is the heart, there is the self. And if we can draw on that by presenting a vision of what psychology can offer, then I think we've got a platform. Following that, and we've discussed this quite a bit, what are the methods for achieving this individuation that we're talking about? It's not, it doesn't just fall out of the sky usually. It's a matter of practice, it's a matter of work. In Jungian psychology, we've got, working with dreams, working with symbols, working with active imagination. In traditions you come from, meditation, contemplation. We've got to put this together, and that would be the means for building the bridge and making it solid.
Definitely. Again, there's so much that comes up. I'm thinking, as you're talking about how difficult it is for change to be introduced. I mean, if we could figure out the recipe for triggering a renaissance, that would be just wonderful. or renacita, an actual fresh breath of life and air. I think of Jung's work as a work in progress, breathtaking, invaluable, just remarkable. But it was one leg in the relay race, and the race must continue. The leg must continue. And my sense of Jung would be that he would be incredibly supportive and encouraged by that.
Absolutely. Yes.
To build next steps referencing his work, not to stop at his work and try and create a small city where everybody just speaks Jung. I'm reminded that when Copernicus originally made his discovery, the church was not very happy with it. Moreover, at a certain point, they regarded it as heresy, and we all know from Dante's remarkable commentary on the church what difficulty can arise when the powers that be just don't want to hear it. So I think we've got to figure out, how do we deconstruct the psychology that exists today, more or less, to make room for what you're talking about? Because the time is ripe. The time is urgent. Time is now for us to move in this direction.
Well, I think we have to recognize the fact that it's what we're proposing is as culturally alien to our times as Copernicus' discovery was in his times. His time, the Catholic Church and its doctrines dominated. In our world, it's materialism and power. And what we're talking about runs very much against and contrary to that. So it's culturally alien, it's unfamiliar. I think Jung despaired at the end of his life that what he was proposing hadn't really caught fire, hadn't taken a stronger place in the culture. And so this is not an easy task, but I think we have to start somewhere. I think if we can start with a vision, a platform, and some methods, and see if there is a response, that would be a big step, I think, Jim. And we're committed to it, right?
Indeed. And, our consideration, I think, has magic in it, which is that we're looking to resolve the binary between time and timelessness, between spirituality and psychology, by recognizing that they're interdependent. And of course, this needs to be worked out. But the fact is that I think we're into some greater truth, greater reality. And this does provide an opportunity for the vision that you're talking about. We need to be able to enter into the deepest level of being that is our nature, while at the same time operating embodied in time in a way that requires a certain kind of deliberate conscious action. And the ego that's disconnected from the self doesn't have agency to make the right turn at the intersection again and again and again. It continues to hit the abutment. In any case, I think we're on track to something very important, and perhaps we can pick it up again.
We will. Okay, Jim. Till another time.